Lizzie Brown. Lizzie was born in the mid-1800s in Clark County and was one of the charter members of New Grove Baptist Church. She would have known Alonzo Powers, Harriet's son, and perhaps Harriet herself. We lived on a farm off of Harvey Mathis Road when I was growing up. It seemed to me that the quilting frame was constantly up. We had a 3-room house, and my mother would hang the frame in the spare bedroom up in the ceiling. We needed these quilts because the houses were really cold back then. I do remember sitting underneath the quilt when it was on the frame. That was my playhouse. The backing on some of my mother's quilts came from sacks that we got from Seagrave's Mill in Madison County, where we took our corn and wheat to have it ground. And we think maybe there's some ruins of that mill still out there somewhere. Is it off of 106, somewhere out that way? I remember watching the big wheels spinning, propelled by water from a nearby creek. My mother quilted into the 1960s when we ran out of space for the quilting frame. One of all the places that I have worked over the last 20 years, Greene County Senior Center has undoubtedly been one of my favorites. A large majority of African elders attend that center, and there's just the most wonderful sense of community. When I started teaching classes there in the early 90s, the center was housed in an old school building. In fact, it was just pathetic. The worst thing about that building was, I have to just say this, was the ladies' bathroom. So in 1995, the county funded this new facility, which is large, well lit, and very accessible, and they have the most lovely ladies' room. It's got pink and flowers, and I just rejoiced when I went in there for the first time. So if you go there today, you're going to find quilts on display, and you're going to find several ladies that are busy working at a quilting frame, and some other ladies will be sewing squares together by hand. There's still a whole lot of quilting going on in Greene County. In 1995, when I was directing the Singing Quilts project, the Greene County Senior Center had a lot of ladies who quilted, but most of them were in their 70s and their 80s. But when I visited the center in 2007, most of those quilters that I had interviewed in the mid-90s had either passed away or they had moved away. There had been an interval when not very much quilting was going on. However, in recent years, a new batch of quilters have come in, and the whole program has experienced a great resurgence. With the help of the staff, I had several women bring in quilts for me to photograph, and I interviewed them as a group. It was during that summer of 2007 that I began planning for the exhibit that we have up today. And the quilters told me they would just love to show their work, and that whenever I was ready, they would have a quilt for me. So I interviewed most of those quilters this past summer, and I'm going to share those stories with you today. This is Mrs. Rosetta Journeyman. I had known her for several years through programs that I did with the Georgia Museum of Art, because she was always interested, participated, and then she had the loveliest smile and a very deep, resonant voice. Rosetta was born in 1929 in Greene County and has lived there all her life. In her mind, there was just no better place. She told me that her children had taken her to Savannah once, and that she had had a nice time, but there is just nothing like home. Rosetta told me that she had come up the hard way, working on a farm, helping with washing and ironing. She was not able to get a formal education, but she managed to raise 9 children, of whom she is very proud. She learned to quilt from watching others do it. Here's what she told me. I set the thread and needles up, and they would quilt from house to house. The most I learned by myself. I can remember when you used to buy Joanna fertilizer in a white sack. They would get lye and soak it with lye soap, which we call potash, to get them letters out of it and make clothes. And we were so glad to buy a sack of flour. Glad to get those sacks. They made good dish rags, hand cloths, or towels and sheets. Well, you could make anything out of them. People are just buying all this stuff now. I tell the children that I think it was way better back yonder. Things are just too expensive today. Unfortunately, Rosetta lost all of her early quilts in 2 house fires. Everything got destroyed. When they put out fires with water, things weren't fit to put in the garbage. Ain't no use saving it. At least nobody ever got burned up, so that was the best part. Rosetta said that she was raised a Christian and church had always been an important part of her life. Yes, Lord, I'm a mother of the church, and if it wasn't for the good Lord, I wouldn't be here. Thank the Lord, all my children are grown, and my grandchildren are grown. I've even got great-great-grandchildren. I'm blessed, and I know I'm blessed. And the center is so important to me. This is my home. I just sleep at my house. I think just about every group has a comedian, and Clara Twilley plays that role among the Greene County quilters. She loves to tease and is well liked by her friends at the center. I interviewed her this past summer, and so I'll share part of her story with you. I was born September 9, 1941 in Greene County. My mama was the mother of 12 children, and I am the 9th. I have lived in Greene County all my life. Mama had all us children, so we would come home from school and she would have the quilts already prepared for us to start quilting. She would roll the quilt up on a rope in the loft of the living room in the day, and then in the afternoon, when we would come home from school, she would get that quilt and take it down for us to learn how to sew. She had 2 on each corner, 2 in the middle, all the way around. She said, now thread your needle and you're going to start right there. She would take each child and take the time to be sure that everybody had enough thread. She took the time to coach us in this quilting. We had a little square to finish before we go to bed. If we didn't finish it, then the next day when we come back from school, we had to finish where we left off. We knew our corner where she had set us down. She would sew on that quilt some because we needed it for winter. I made my first quilt when I was a grown woman. It was one I just threw together at home. It was a patch quilt. You got a color here, you got a color there, and you got enough to make a quilt for a medium-sized bed. I needed to make a quilt because it was getting cold. They weren't making houses then like they are now, so you needed more cover than you do now. It was hard times back then, but we made it. I was glad that my mama learned me how to sew. Knowing how to do something helped you to be a survivor. I didn't do much quilting after I got to working. So when I started coming back to the senior center, they were doing this quilting and they said, "You don't know how to quilt." I said, "You just wait until I get my new eyes." She was talking about her glasses. She had to get new glasses. "And I'll show you how to quilt. And they are going to come out perfect." They didn't believe me. So when I made my quilt, they said, "Well, you sure can quilt." And I said, "Yes, I learned when I was 9, and you don't forget what you know." I haven't made any quilts completely by myself, but I've just hooked on a bunch of quilts. Just to say I made them by myself, well, I pieced them up, but somebody always helps me quilt them up. I love sitting around and talking to the other ladies and things. I get a kick out of it. We have fun and joke each other. It's amazing that the quilts go by so fast. Now, 2 ladies are in the audience here that I'm about to talk about. This is Renee Allen.
Stand up, Renee.
Stand up. And then we have Belinda Pedrosa. And they are the youngsters in the Hands exhibit. And when I told them that they were going to be the youngsters in the exhibit, they died laughing like, "Ooh." I said, "Well, you know, in this awesome venue of quilts and quilters, you are the youngsters." I had first seen the work of these 2 women at an exhibit of quilts in Decatur 2 years ago. I think it was sponsored, I'm not sure, was it the Ebony Stitchers Quilt Guild show? And when I went, I was so pleased to see the large number of younger African-American women who were quilting enthusiasts. And so I decided to invite Renee and Belinda to be a part of this celebration. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that is that most of the ladies out here in these rural areas, I would ask them, you know, if any of their children were quilting, and they would, nobody's children were quilting. They were like, "No, they just cannot sit still long enough. They say they want to, but they just don't ever do it." And so they felt like quilting was dying out in the Black community, and I wanted them to meet these younger quilters and make a connection with that new generation. And I think that definitely happened when we had the opening for our exhibit on October 5th. So I went to the in-town quilt shop in Decatur in September and interviewed Renee and Belinda. And both of them were so enthusiastic about quilting, and they shared some of their history with me. This is Renee. I was born September 27, 1958 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. First, I learned to sew. My mother made me learn how to sew, and I thank her to this day. I made doll clothes and then my own clothes in high school. My friends always wondered what I was going to wear on Saturday night because I would just whip something up at the last minute. Then I migrated into sewing for other people and then drapes. I was always fascinated with quilts. My grandmother had a quilt that I thought was so cool. So for me, it was a natural migration. I taught myself. Initially, those quilts were anything but square. I had to learn as I went along. I think that is why I do story quilts, because I can manipulate fabrics to make it do what I want it to do. For me, that's easier than following a pattern. I'm very dramatic and love to tell a good story, so I like to do the same thing with quilts. Even though the quilt has one story, people still bring their own interpretations to it. To me, that makes it more endearing, and it allows me to kind of whisper in someone's ear a point of view or an idea. There is something about quilting. You are taking your time, and while you are working out problems with your hands, you work out problems in your mind. For me, it relaxes me. It calms me down. It lets me think through a problem or a situation. Sometimes people look at me and say, "What? You quilt?" They just don't know what goes into quilting. It's not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of focus, a lot of patience, a lot of ingenuity and design. When someone gives you a quilt, they are truly giving you something that is priceless. They love you. Handled it with care because many hours went into it.